Hello and welcome to our weekly percussion rudiment class. This is a chance for percussionists to practice their rudiments, and our rudiments this week are going to be all about rolls. There's a bunch of different types of rolls that you can do and a bunch of different combinations. We're going to strictly focus on the multiple bounce roll. It could also be called the buzz roll. Most of you are familiar with that term, buzz roll. It's also called the press roll and different things like that, and we'll also talk about the double stroked roll. So first we'll talk about the multiple bounce roll. It's exactly how it sounds in its name. Each stroke on each hand is going to be multiple bounces to achieve the sound that we're going for. So a good way that I practice this is going to be just doing each hand individually with multiple bounces, something like this. You just let the stick drop and drop to the drum pad or the snare drum or whatever you have at home, and let it bounce as many times as you can without obviously letting go of the stick. It looks something like this. And so what I do is I go really slow at the beginning and then I speed up, something like this. Until we get a smooth sound like you just heard at the end. The goal of the multiple bounce roll is to get a smooth, even sound. We don't want any extra stick movements like this. If you push too hard and press too hard into the snare drum or the drum pad, you won't get as even of a sound. You'll get more of a kind of a tense sound, and that's not what we want. So over your practice this week, practice doing each hand individually and then combining them together so that you get a smooth roll like this. The faster you go with the buzz roll, the faster the strokes have to go. You'll find a spot where it's easiest to do the multiple bounce roll and you won't have to do so many strokes one after the other. Well, you'll find a spot where the buzzes are consistent and even, and where you don't have to do too many individual strokes like this. Something like that. So let's practice together. We'll go slow, and we'll start on the right hand. I'm going to mirror you, so I'll be starting on my left hand, but you start on your right hand. Here we go. And a good way to stop is just by lifting the sticks slightly up off the drum pad instead of pressing them into it, just like it was called with a press roll. One tip that you want to think about is making sure that your fingers don't fly up like this on the sticks. You want to make sure that they're not holding the stick super firm, but you have a good rounded grip there. Mostly what's going to happen is the thumb and the first finger are going to use a lot of the kind of power to make the roll happen. Okay, let's try it again with our multiple bounce on each hand. What you'll notice is that you want to really practice this on a snare drum if you have it. It's good to practice it on a drum pad if that's all you have, but you really want to practice it on a snare drum because that, since the snare drum is deeper and it's a wider instrument and it has more of a tone to it, you can listen to how the how the snare drum reacts to the different buzzes and even the different sticks and the different pressures that you get on the press roll and the multiple bounce rolls. So if you have a snare drum, I would highly recommend practicing on that. When you're practicing on the snare drum, you want to make sure that you don't play right in the center of the snare drum, because that's the worst spot to play on the snare drum. You want to play slightly off center. So I play a little bit towards the front rim of the snare drum, so that I get a clearer sound. Again, on the drum pad, you don't get too much of that, but on a snare drum, you definitely do get that change of sound there. The notation for the multiple bounce roll is notated with a Z. You can see it right here. It can either be notated as any note value. I wrote half notes and quarter notes there for you. And then the one on the bottom here is just kind of an example of what it might look like if you were doing 2 quarter notes with a multiple bounce at the beginning and then a release stroke at the end. So a good way to do this is just straight quarter notes with a multiple bounce roll like I had written, and then a release stroke like this. And you could also do it reverse. You could also do a stroke at the beginning. So that would be a good way to practice it. Again, what we're going for is even strokes, a smooth stroke, and a smooth sound the entire time. Okay, next is our double stroke roll, which means that each stroke is going to have two smaller strokes to it. So I'll demonstrate it for you. If we started on the right hand, it would look something like this. We get 2 strokes on the left. On the right. 2 strokes on the right. 2 strokes on the left. 2 strokes on the right, and so that was an example of going slow to fast and back to slow. Again, you'll notice that it sounds very similar to a multiple bounce roll when I get going fast on the double stroke, but it's actually a little bit different. It sounds a little bit more clear, and in percussion we call it a more open sound. You usually find double stroke rolls on marches and different, more traditional music of that sort. In the orchestral world, playing orchestra music or wind ensemble music, you'll mostly see multiple bounce rolls, even though the notation kind of varies from piece to piece and composer to composer. A good way to practice double stroke rolls is not only going from slow to fast to slow, but also doing what's called a check pattern. A check pattern, you can check yourself. That's why they call it a check pattern, so that you can check to make sure that you're doing it right. What we'll do is we'll do a double stroke pattern with a check pattern. So we're going to do 4 16th notes and then a quarter note. It's going to sound something like this. So that was 4 16th notes plus a quarter note. And then what we can do later is we can do a double stroke roll over the 16th notes like this. Here's the check pattern. And then you do the double stroke roll for the 16th notes. I'll demonstrate that again. Oh, sorry, let me try it again. So you can try that a number of different ways, but that's one of the more common check patterns that you'll be able to do. So let's try that. Let's do the check for one measure, and then the double stroke roll with a quarter note for the next measure. Again, I'll demonstrate it. It'll look something like this. Let's try it. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, go. One more time. Great, awesome. You can do that. That was kind of a slower tempo, so let's go a little faster. 1, 2, ready, go. Great. That was, and then let's go one more time faster. 1, 2, ready, go. One more time. Awesome. Now that leads us into our final portion of this lesson, which is the 9-stroke roll. The 9-stroke roll is exactly what we were just doing with the double stroke roll, but it's notated something similar to this. You can notice it has a 9 on the top of it. Again, it's the exact same way, it's the exact same thing that we just played, but it's notated like this. Again, that's the 9-stroke roll. It'll be notated just like it was, with a quarter note with 3 slashes next to it. That means that you want to play a double stroke roll for each of the 16th note strokes. And below that notation, you could see the check pattern that was written. So this will be a 9-stroke roll. We can do a check pattern and then the 9-stroke roll. So that'll be the 9-stroke roll. You'll see that very commonly in band music and orchestral music. Maybe the notation might be different, but it'll still be the same. Let's try the 9-stroke roll with the check pattern a little faster. 1, 2, ready, go. One more time. And you can also do that on the left hand, starting on the left hand, so let's try it. The check pattern first, and then the 9-stroke roll starting on the left hand. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, go. One more time. And you can also do that in a number of varying different tempos, but that'll give you one option for how to practice that double stroke roll. So that was the multiple bounce roll and the double stroke roll. Again, that's just one start to both of those rudiments and how to practice them. You can make your own exercises. It doesn't have to be just those, but those I would recommend finding a check pattern to utilize for both the multiple bounce roll and also the double stroke roll. I'll leave some links in the description below for some links to the Vic Firth website so that you can look at how the double stroke roll and the multiple bounce roll sounds on a snare drum. If you like this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to this channel for more of these lessons, and we'll see you next week for another awesome rudiment lesson. We'll see ya.